Aging reactors, energy prices, disasters. Nuclear power has been falling out of favor in the US for decades, but the conversation is changing. The intensifying threat of global warming and the explosion of AI is boosting the outlook of nuclear energy. This is an inflection point.
But we will get to the point that by 2050 we have zero emissions.
More than 100 nations have set lofty net zero targets, forcing the world to weigh the inherent risks and high cost of atomic power, which has no carbon emissions. That includes the United States.
The climate change moment is upon us now, and we need to meet that moment today and decarbonize our grid. Solar power, wind power, battery storage, they should go as fast as they physically can. And even that's not going to be fast enough. So now we need to complement it with other tools like nuclear power.
When you start talking about decarbonizing our economy by 2050, you realize that's a huge challenge. You really need all of those technologies to come together to meet those kinds of goals. I think nuclear plays a very significant role in fighting climate change. It is already the largest source of clean electricity, and I think it'll continue to grow in that area.
If the United States wants to revive its nuclear industry, it will take a panoramic effort. That includes maintaining aging reactors, building new ones, and fostering various startups. But the country faces a gauntlet of issues in order to convert that enthusiasm into results. The U.S. first commercialized nuclear fission energy in the 1950s. It was a remarkable feat of engineering to capture energy created by splitting uranium.
Most of the plants, they started building them in the late 60s and into the 1970s. At its peak, we had 112 operating nuclear reactors. And in 1979, we had the 3 Mile Island nuclear accident, and the U.S. nuclear industry pretty much ground to a halt.
3 Mile Island caused widespread panic at the time, and though the crisis is now declared over, it's left a question mark over the whole future of the American power industry.
We saw 13 reactors shut down from 2013 to 2022, mostly for economic reasons, because nuclear power plants, they're expensive to operate, and natural gas was becoming cheaper, wind and solar were becoming more common and cheaper.
Today, the U.S. has 94 operating reactors, generating around 20% of the country's electricity. If the U.S. wants to increase its nuclear power output, the first step is maintaining or even reopening aging reactors. Oconee Nuclear Station in South Carolina was part of that first wave of nuclear plants. Its first reactor began operation in 1973.
The Oconee plant in South Carolina, for a long time, was the biggest nuclear power plant in the United States. It's your standard light water reactor. That's the conventional model that we're using in all of the power plants in the United States today. Nuclear power plants in the U.S. get licensed for 40 years. When they started building them in the 60s and 70s, that was kind of the expectation. Let's take them for 40 years and see what happens after that. Most of them have now been extended even longer than that.
Today, utility companies are investing in their nuclear plants like Oconee so they can run for 80 years and maybe even longer. But back in the early 2010s, that wasn't the case. The industry was beleaguered by competition from cheaper natural gas and renewable wind and solar, and rattled by the disaster at Fukushima. No one was fighting to keep an old nuclear plant open.
While we were seeing all of these plants close, the other side of the coin is that we weren't seeing any new construction of new power plants either.
President George W. Bush launched the Nuclear Power 2010 program as a response to that downturn. Only 2 utilities heeded his call, and one of them reached the finish line. Southern Company completed their expansion of Vogtle in early 2024 with reactors 3 and 4, but it came in 7 years behind schedule and more than double its $14 billion budget. Meanwhile, dozens of nuclear reactors were shelved.